My name is Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and today is going to be like your favorite day of elementary school when you don't have to do real work, because we're opening with a film strip. So turn out the lights, start eating your glue, and enjoy. Film strip. Okay, so that's Gotham City. Everything's blowing up. Guy from The Fifth Element's super happy. And there's Rob Roy. Boom, take that. Now Batman's gonna kill him, but does Batman kill people?
No, I just will let you die because of things I am directly responsible for.
Okay, bye. He goes over there. And here's the big payoff. Look for it. He accepts that he's gonna die, and then I'm just gonna be down here in this rubble if anybody needs me. Not quite an elaborate enough death yet. Stick with me. It'd be better if that blew up, just so we really know. There we go. Okay, that's probably funny, though. Okay. Liam Neeson is the bad guy in this movie, but the way he went out caused me to respect him. I mean, the guy knows he's going to die, and rather than doing something dramatic or petty, he just closes his eyes and accepts the thing. I have never faced certain death, or even possible death, so I don't really know how I would respond to that, but I'm guessing it would be with slightly less dignity. Well, Paul, by the time we get to Acts chapter 22, is a cagey veteran at facing down certain death, because everybody always wants to murder him for ideas. So he's had lots of chances to practice his technique for what to do when mobs want to murder him, and clearly he's arrived at the conclusion that the best thing to do is to continue to tell the truth about the whole Jesus thing, even if it means that he might get hit with a few or a lot of rocks. So he's in Jerusalem. There's an insane mob that's already tried to murder him. They're still in kind of a murdery mood. And Paul is going to take the stand and lay it out one more time to an audience who's made it abundantly clear that they hate his ideas, what the deal is with Jesus, and to try to persuade his kinsmen to give this thing another look. So we're in Acts chapter 22, finding out what happens to Paul. We actually left off last time at the end of chapter 21 with Paul being pulled away from this angry mob of religious zombies by Roman soldiers who were taking them to their barracks to protect him from these people. And in the process of all of this hubbub, Paul gets the attention of the Roman commander, says, "Can I say something to you?" And the commander is pretty sure that he's figured out who Paul must be. And he accuses Paul of being an Egyptian rebel leader who's been on the lam for a few years at this point. We have some corroboration externally on this detail. Josephus, the famous Jewish historian who wrote about all this stuff, does confirm that there was a guy who led a rebellion in Egypt around 54 AD. So presumably that's what we're talking about here. But Paul clarifies, well, no, I'm not that guy at all. I'm a Jew. I'm from this place over here. And that seems to buy him permission from the commander to get up and speak to this crowd. So he motions for them to be silent. And then we get into the speech, which I need you to read in its entirety right now, or this isn't going to make any sense. Like I said a little bit earlier, Paul is an experienced veteran when it comes to dealing with large groups of people who want to savagely murder him in public. And one of the things that he's learned along the way is that there are certain things you can do to at least get an audience with a group of people long enough to maybe make a point. And so rather than getting up and using the common language of the day, which would have been Greek, he uses Aramaic. And that apparently has a positive effect because the angry Jewish crowd quiets down and they give him a listen. Paul gives this speech, and if it sounds familiar, it should, because it's the second of 3 times in the book of Acts that we get the whole spiel about what happened as Paul traveled on the road up to Damascus and was converted from being someone who wanted to kill and arrest Christians to being a Christian who wanted to go and face being killed and arrested in order to do redemptive things and be on Team Jesus. You can get the general story in Acts chapter 9 or in episode 38 of this series on the book of Acts. But what's interesting about the way Paul chooses to relay the story this time around is that he's framing it in a very Jewish way. So he starts by saying, I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, Jerusalem, like Jewish headquarters, Jew land, under Gamaliel. I was thoroughly trained in the law of our fathers and was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. So he's reminding them, like I talked about in the last episode, like, hey guys, we went to Jewish school together. We studied together. We did things together. In fact, like some of y'all, I went to better Jewish school then. I worked with Gamaliel. This is the guy of guys right now. He actually comes up in the book of Acts and is revered by everybody else in the room when he speaks. So pretty clearly, Paul is taking a tack to remind them that he's not some weird foreign outsider who wants to come in and disrupt the whole history of what God has been doing with the Jewish people. He's on their side. It's an attempt to demonstrate objectivity in his response to this. And then he follows it up after framing it in such a way that would say, wow, how would anyone so rooted in this tradition ever see it any other way? Man, that would take a really dramatic experience. Well, then he comes back with the really dramatic experience that it would take for someone that smart and rooted to see it the exact opposite way. And he gives a story, and there's no account of anybody yelling at him or freaking out, no zombie moans or calls for brains until verse 21. We get through all of this stuff. Let me go 19. It says, Lord, I replied, these men know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Again, no problem with that. Verse 21. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. And that's when we're back to Crazyville. I was listening to an interview from a guy who's one of those contributors on those awful cable news screaming head programs. He's a really smart economist, and he was talking about why he doesn't say really smart economics things when he's on those programs. He said, look, maybe with a ton of time to prepare and 15 uninterrupted minutes, I could explain to a typical cable news audience member how this economic principle works. But I have 15 seconds and people are screaming at me while I'm trying to talk. So instead, I do what everyone on those programs does, and I resort to manipulation and half-truths. Well, that's kind of a bummer, but I get why you could reach a place of defeat where you say, well, if I want to affect change, I guess I need to be a little bit dishonest because that's the way the game is played. Paul chooses not to do that. If he wanted to play this game well, he might have manipulated a little bit and just skipped the Gentile stuff to try and find a point of commonality, and maybe we can get to that, a couple years down the road. But the reason he had to talk about the Gentile stuff, in addition to the fact that it's in red letters in the Bible, indicating, of course, that it's from Jesus. If you don't have a red letter Bible, I think you can still be a Christian and it's okay. It's from God, but in addition to it being from God, it's kind of the crux of the whole message. When you really look back, not just at the rest of the New Testament, but the whole Old Testament, you see that all the way back at the beginning, when God explained to Abraham that he was going to do this thing where he was going to redeem all kinds of broken stuff, he had the world in view. The idea was that cool things were going to happen to Abraham and his descendants, but that was with the idea that all the nations would be blessed through him. Even the stuff that God promises David about this line and this kingdom and this great king that's going to come out of the lineage of David to rule over everything that all the Jews would have been looking forward to, there's also the promise in there that all the nations would come and worship and that this would be for everybody. And so it's very important to linger on this point just enough to understand that the Gentile thing was not an afterthought. The Gentile thing was central to the message, and Paul simply could not divorce the language about everyone being included in the grace of God from the message of Jesus. But once again, it's abundantly clear that the Gentile thing is the deal breaker for the people Paul is talking to. I feel a little bit of sympathy for them on this point because, in fairness, non-Jews have kicked around Jewish people for generations and generations at this point. I could see why they would want to imagine that God and God's kingdom and redemption and hope are all things that they have a monopoly on and that nobody else gets, and it's a way of evening the score for the abuse that they've taken. But the bottom line is just not what the Bible teaches. God's made it clear that he has a special place in his heart for the Jewish people, but that all along the plan was to reach the non-Jewish people as well with this message of the kingdom. Well, so they get real mad. They say, rid the earth of Paul. He's not fit to live. They're throwing their cloaks in the air and dust and doing protests that we don't really understand anymore, that don't make any sense. But trust me, it conveys, we don't like what you're saying and we're super grouchy. From a Roman perspective, looks like we've got some people who are mad, and they're very, very mad. And we've got a dude over here who said something that we don't understand that made him mad. Then as Romans, I think the only thing to do is to flog the problem. So they stretch Paul out to have him flogged, and just about the time they're doing that, he quickly mentions, hey, like, I don't know if it's a big deal or whatever, but I'm a Roman citizen, so... And anytime someone ends an argument with so and then ellipses, that means your goose is cooked, pal, because he hit with a so argument. So the centurion heard this, and he goes to the commander, and he's like, dude's a Roman citizen. And we just about whipped him, and the commander and Paul have a conversation, and the commander is struck by the reality of Paul's citizenship and thinks about the nature of how much he had to pay to gain his own citizenship, and Paul ultimately ends up being not flogged for once, which is kind of refreshing. So Paul, as we're going to leave it, is in chains awaiting, we don't even know what's going to happen next, but he's at least preserved from the zombie mob who's turned on him and given yet a third, fourth, fifth, eighth, 50th rejection of the message of Jesus, even one catered for their ears. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. How come it seems like we're spending so much time obsessing about the tension between Jewish people and Christians in the book of Acts? Is it there's something wrong with Jewish people and Acts is offering a blanket condemnation of all Jews forever? Well, no, that's nonsense. If the rest of the New Testament talks about the continued role of the Jewish people, it talks about a whole bunch of Jewish people, mostly Jewish people, who become followers of Christ and respond to this stuff. So no, this book isn't calling for some kind of rejection of Jews or even necessarily Judaism. If anything, it seems like what it's calling for is a completion of Judaism that would include Christ. Unfortunately, given enough time, people will read any document in weird ways, and stuff like this has been used in corners of the world to justify bad treatment of Jewish people. But this is not a rejection of Jewish people. This is a rejection of rejecting Christ. And what we're seeing here are the decisions of one group of people at one moment in time who just happened to be the religious leadership who were in a position to either draw all of God's chosen people into following the Messiah they theoretically were all looking for, or into violently rejecting the Messiah. And this group of leaders at this moment chose the latter. And I think the best way to view this tension between Paul and the Jewish people as it ultimately comes to a head here in the home stretch of Acts is just one more obstacle that the gospel and the message of the grace of God is bigger than. Hey, big thanks to everybody who's commenting on the YouTube channel. We've had great conversations over the last few episodes, so thank you all for that. Additionally, I did receive some complaints about the last episode that Tina abruptly cut off your opportunity to admire my head shape. And so I wanted to rectify that for you right now as I continue through the rest of this outro. One other big thank you is to a fan from Lander, Wyoming, who took over 60 hours to knit me this completely legitimate sweatshirt. Look at that thing. Look how tight it is. I'm sweating under here. I smell like cabbage. Warm cabbage mixed with like older pumpkins, like the pumpkins when they start to cave in, that kind of smell. But also check out how awesome this hood is. It's like Assassin's Creed giant awesome, because it's my wife. My wife is the fan from Lander, Wyoming who made this. I'm just going to keep wearing it because I feel cool. Oh, also please subscribe. Feels weird that we can't make eye contact now, so I guess bye.